About 3 months ago, I found myself scrolling through social media and noticed a couple of storytime videos about people's experiences with letting their nanny go. It it really caught my attention and got me reflecting on the importance of empathy and communication in these situations. And it was the use of the language that got me wondering, like, where did we lose it to talk about domestic workers in such a manner? Things like we had to get rid of her, as if a nanny is like a pair of shoes. You wear them once, and if they don't fit, you toss them aside. But nannies aren't objects. They are human beings. They are mothers, daughters, breadwinners, and while it's valid to end a working relationship that isn't right, how we do it matters. And that's what this episode is going to be about today. It's okay to let a nanny go when it's not working. You're not expected to stick it out forever, but there's a way to do it that doesn't strip someone of dignity. The problem is that we often treat the moment casually, transactional, when it actually shapes how someone feels about their worth and their work. And you know, I've had to learn this the hard way, right? So in 2019, I hired a nanny who, if I have to be honest, I knew from the start that she wasn't a fit. But I was going through a divorce that year, and I had already had 2 or 3 nannies leave earlier in that year. I didn't have the emotional strength to start over again, to be honest. And so she stayed for about 6 months. She did the job in terms of like her tasks, her responsibilities. She did her job well, but our personalities clashed. I felt like a visitor in my own home. I was cramped. I felt, I had to shrink, and by the time December came, like we had a fallout. And here's what happened. So I usually pay her at the end of the month. And so I paid her salary at the end of November as per usual, right? And then early in December, she had to go home for the December holidays. But so she went on the 5th of December. And she assumed that since she was leaving early, I would give her the full December salary upfront. But I wasn't planning to do that until later in the month, like closer to the 20th, when I also got paid. To me, it made sense because that's how I'd always done it with my previous nannies. Um, but the issue was that where she worked before, her employers always paid her the full December salary when she left. Whether she left on the 1st or on the 15th, whenever she left, they gave her her full salary. So when I told her I'd pay her late in the month, she was furious. She was so angry. She felt cheated. She was really livid, and she resigned on the spot. And I was puzzled at first. I thought, but I never paid you late. Why are you acting like this? Like, why? Like, I was really, really puzzled. But in Jan, when I reflected, I realized that she and I had both been operating on assumptions. She assumed I'd pay upfront. I assumed she'd wait like how my past nannies had, you know, and neither of us had actually clarified this at the start. And that's on me as the employer. I skipped that onboarding conversation. I didn't check expectations. And so even though she worked out, like she's the one who decided to resign, I didn't let her go. but I still carry the responsibility as the employer. And later, I had to call her in Jan to ask for forgiveness, and we both acknowledged that miscommunication was at the heart of it. This is just an example of just how miscommunication and operating on assumptions can get to, So before I dive into some strategies that you can apply, I want to be really clear that letting go of your nanny is never really easy. I know some parents might be tempted to not care too much about how they handle it. Let's be honest, some domestic workers have a reputation for not pitching in or walking away if a working relationship isn't right. And when you have had experiences like that, before it's easy to think, well, my last nanny didn't even show up. Why should I bother being thoughtful this time? Here's the truth. The temptation, while understandable, it's not an excuse. Every nanny deserves respect and empathy, regardless of hearsay or past experiences. Just because one nanny didn't show up or because previous situations went sideways, it doesn't mean you inherit that energy or allow it to dictate how you act now. This is about integrity. It's about doing what's right in this particular situation, and it shouldn't really be based on the baggage of others or even your own past experiences. And I also know that it can feel like, but being thoughtful or not, at the end of the day, it's not going to change the fact that I have to let her go. And that reality is hard, but you being thoughtful and showing empathy on how you handle this can have a massive difference on how your nanny feels, you know. By approaching this thoughtfully, you preserve her dignity and respect, and you also set the stage for healthier working relationships in the future. And like I said, I've learned these lessons the hard way through my own missteps. And here's what I've discovered. I've learned that the first thing that I've learned is that you have to start with accountability. As the employer, you set the tone. Before pointing out what went wrong, you have to own your part. Back in 2019, I hired a nanny know deep down that she wasn't the right fit because I was exhausted and going through a divorce, and I had already cycled through a few nannies. I skipped the hard conversations and hoped things would just work out, you know. And that choice costed both of us. And so when you approach the conversation, I opening with humility, um, and so when you approach the conversation of, making the decision of letting your nanny go, you can approach it with humility, and you can, say something like, I realized I didn't handle the hiring process perfectly, and I want to take responsibility for that. When you acknowledge your part, acknowledging your part won't soften the blow. It will shift the power dynamic, showing you respect your nanny as a person and not just an employee. And my failure to do this early on created tension and confusion that could have been avoided. And the second thing is that when you're having this conversation, you have to keep it about fit and not blame. Words matter. Instead of you listing every shortcoming, focusing on the mismatch, you can just make them aware that this isn't the right fit for my family and what I need in this season. In my case, our personality clashed, and I felt like a visitor in my home, as I've said. I focused too much on the task she did well and not on the overall fit. Because remember that the nanny self-esteem has to also be intact, because after that she still has to go and look for another job. So you really don't have to beat someone when they already are down, you know. And so the third thing is that you have to think about offering them notice or some form of support where possible. I mean, and this is this is obviously dependent on how the nanny was. Sometimes you have to let them go because of they are a lovely person, but they were just not a fit for your family. But sometimes maybe the nanny was just like borderline rude, and disrespectful, So obviously this is going to be dependent on your situation. But whenever you can, just provide notice and support where possible. You can recommend the nanny to some families or help them register with other agencies. And I know that in the country where I'm living in South Africa, like most domestic workers don't have CVs. And these are the things that you can suggest to the nanny that this is how I can help you. Let me help you create your CV. Let me see which agencies we can register you. And this is going to show that you respect their livelihood. Well, the fourth thing that you need to be mindful of when you're approaching this conversation is you have to express appreciation. I know even if they were there for short term, every employee like deserves acknowledgement. And I didn't fully recognize the small ways that nanny showed up and how she cared for the kids and kept the routines running. And expressing appreciation can help someone live with their dignity intact, even if the working relationship wasn't perfect. And had I acknowledged her contributions from the start, the clash over the December salary might have been easier to navigate and less personal. Appreciation does soften the hard edges of parting ways. And the last thing that I would suggest you do is to reflect before looking for another nanny. You know, after she left, I took the time to reflect and I realized both of us had been operating on assumptions, as I've said. Uh, she assumed that I paid her upfront and I assumed that she'd follow my usual schedule. And I hadn't checked expectations and I didn't handle the onboarding properly. And reflection helped me with my own mistakes and learn for future hires. If you don't reflect, there is a possibility that you will repeat the same pattern. And that um that December situation taught me that dignity is lost when there is no clarity, when there is no reflection, and when there is no humility. I want to highlight that while some of the suggestions I shared might seem unnecessary in the moment, the lack of reflection can lead to bigger challenges down the line. For instance, I've experienced how, without proper reflection, we ended up making costly decisions. Like there was a point when we were so tired of just nanny drama and we sent our daughter to boarding school. And that decision was was a was a real mistake, right? Because it really it only strained us financially and emotionally and mentally because we had to fetch her every week at the boarding school. And yeah, no, the traveling was a lot. And if we had taken the time to reflect and adjust the approach on how we go about hiring nannies and reflect on what is it that we could have done to make sure that we create a conducive, healthy environment for our nannies. Also, how do we make sure that we vet people? And so, my key takeaway is that being intentional and reflective when letting go of your nanny can prevent repeating the same mistake. It's not just about the immediate situation. It's about setting yourself up for long-term success. By reflecting, you increase the chance of finding the right fit in the future and avoid unnecessary setbacks. And so, in closing, I want to emphasize that while reflection and intention can greatly improve the outcome of letting go of a nanny, I also recognize that, sometimes things can go work out by chance. Like, even if you don't do this reflection and you don't let go of the current nanny that you have with empathy, the next nanny that you get might be a fit without you all doing all of the work. However, it's important to understand that relying on luck isn't guaranteed for everyone. For many, consistent reflection and intentionality can significantly reduce the risk of repeating past mistakes and increase the likelihood of a positive outcome, because ultimately you need to understand that being proactive and reflective is key, and that avoiding the pitfall of complacency can lead to a more stable and successful experiences in the long run. So if you had just let go of your nanny and you need support in hiring your next nanny, I have a free guide that you can download. This guide has a framework that can support you. It's a guide that I created to help parents hire and manage nannies thoughtfully, to from interviewing questions to onboarding to performance management. It's everything I wish I had back in 2019. So if you're currently in a situation where you realizing that, you know what, I have to let go of my nanny, just remember this: you can do it with dignity. You can, hold yourself accountable. You can be a compassion, and um and also reflect on the part that you play. In the next episode, I am going to be talking about endurance in the nanny relationship, how to know when to hold on and invest in a nanny versus when it's truly time to go, because it's not every nanny that you need to part ways with. And striking that balance is key, and knowing when to let go and knowing when to invest, it's key. And so next week I will be sharing the guidance on how to tell when to keep a nanny and when it's time to really move on, so you can make these decisions with clarity and confidence. If you are listening to this and you know someone that is in a situation where they have many issues and they are thinking of letting them go, share with them this episode. Comment down below and share your experiences on how you let go of your nanny, and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next episode.